All right, so I do want to say that, this is not my words, but this is through really the teachings of the Reverend and Mrs. Samyang Moon, and it's based off of this book, The Exposition of the Divine Principle. I'm just giving you a summary version of the core content that's covered in that text. So this is in the very first sentence of this text. There's a bold statement: every human being is struggling to attain lifelong happiness and overcome misfortune. I'll read this one more time. Every human being is struggling to attain lifelong happiness and overcome misfortune. So it's an interesting concept to think about, that there is this struggle in our minds where we want to be happy, but for whatever reason, it's challenging to be happy all the time. And, living life, you might come to accept that maybe that's just the reality. There's no way going around it. Another more deeper challenge is, we want to be good, we want to do good, but sometimes we find ourselves doing the opposite, seeking more self-centered means or doing things that hurt other people, even though that's not what we really want to do. So the principle identifies that within ourselves, we have this fundamental contradiction. And this is what's causing us to experience a lot of the unhappiness and dysfunction in our lives. So it's really important to, I guess, understand or identify that or acknowledge that we have a problem if we ever want to solve it. So the principle identifies two aspects of happiness to consider. The first is the external or more material things, things we can see, things that are very tangible. For example, our physical well-being, like our health, having stable financial circumstances, developing our career. These are all external and material things that contribute to our happiness. So I'm not going to say that, money doesn't buy happiness. Actually, external things are an important aspect of contributing to our happiness, because if we don't have those comforts or that sense of security, it does affect our level of happiness. However, in the principle, it explains that there's actually two aspects. There is this external material aspect that we need to pay attention to, but there's also another fundamental aspect, which is the internal and spiritual aspect of our life. These are things that are not, they're tangible, but they're not like, how do I say, external or physical. These include things like our personal relationships, our character, love. These are things that are more internal and spiritual. You can't quite measure it, but they're real. And, many times, if we focus on just material external things in our lives, like if we pursue wealth and our physical health and those things as our primary purpose, then many times we find that there's something missing, that we're not completely happy. So the idea here is that the principle explains that actually, in order to be really wholesomely happy, we do need to address both our external factors as well as our internal factors in order to truly be happy. On a broader scale, we can say that, science has really help to address some of the external ignorance and pursue external truth so that we can advance and provide more material development in this society and world. Similarly, religion has really sought to seek internal truths and help us address internal ignorance, kind of to help elevate our spiritual education, our spiritual understanding, so that we can find that kind of internal, nurture our internal selves and seek that internal happiness. And again, science, on the other half of that, is really helped us with all this technology, having, just 20 years ago, we didn't even have cell phones. And if you think about it, what would we do without cell phones? There used to be a time where we existed without cell phones, but and even the internet is only like 30 years old. So it's but these external developments has really helped increase the comfort and the well-being of human beings. However, one challenge that we see is that it seems like religion and science are at odds with each other, that they're in contradiction or in conflict with each other. Kind of like the internal and external that we talked about earlier. Sometimes people of faith may, deny or diminish the value of external material things, and vice versa too. Those who pursue science may tend to discredit the value of religion or more internal immaterial things. But we need a truth that can actually bring both sides together in harmony so that they don't have to be in conflict, but there's a way to see it so that both actually are valuable parts of a whole picture. And that's what's kind of covered or explained in the divine principle. Here's a quote, says, "The new truth should be able to unify the knowledge of reconciling the internal truth pursued by religion and the external truth pursued by science. The new truth should lead fallen people to block the ways of the evil mind and to pursue the goals of the original mind, enabling them to attain goodness. It should guide people to remove the double-mindedness that sometimes seeks good and sometimes evil." So this actually covers two key components. We talked about the internal and external, that really the new truth needs to bring harmony within that. But there's a deeper contradiction, and that is this desire to attain goodness, but at the same time seeking evil. And this kind of inner conflict within ourselves, this one's a more difficult thing to resolve. And the key to resolving, and this is kind of exposed or introduced in the divine principle, the key to resolving that conflict within ourselves lies in none other than really developing a personal relationship with God. This is the key. Without having that personal relationship with God, there is no way of overcoming the tendencies to do evil. Because God is a source of love, and unless we tap into that source of love, there's no way we can overcome this kind of internal battle that we have inside. So the key to really overcoming, one is understanding the harmony between internal, external, science, and religion, but the more fundamental contradiction of good and evil can only be overcome if we actually develop a personal relationship with God. So in the divine principle, we actually talk about the nature of God, and also go into, why would this omnipotent and all-powerful God create in the first place? What was the purpose of his creation? One challenge with building a relationship with God is that God's invisible. So how do we even go about building a relationship with God? So that's the kind of thing that we actually address in the divine principle. Also, this is some very interesting. After we cover this kind of original ideal, the principle discloses what went wrong. It's covered in the section called the fall. Where did evil come from? What was the source or the beginning point of evil? This is really important to address because it just doesn't make sense that if God is all powerful and God is good, why is there so much evil in this world? So in order to really address that question, the principle actually explains the source of the fall and what went wrong. And it's only by understanding the root of the problem that we can even imagine how we can actually address it. And finally, in the third section of the divine principle, we cover what we call restoration. How can we restore? How has God tried to restore humanity back to God? And what role do we play in this restoration process? How can we actually work together with God to build his original intended kingdom of heaven here on earth? So again, simply, there's the original ideal, what went wrong, and the process of restoration. And all throughout, really, this is about God's story. It's about God's heart of excitement and hope at the beginning of creation, about God's heart of sorrow and pain and disappointment at the time of the fall, and really God's heart of absolute determination to fulfill his originally intended will and create his ideal kingdom that God wanted from the very beginning. So I mentioned in the very beginning, but there'll be 5 total sessions. Today we cover intro, which I just did, and the principles of creation, first part, and then next week is the second part of the principle of creation. Third session will be on the fall of man, fourth on the providence of restoration, and fifth, we're going to cover the role of true parents, the blessing, and how we go about now building the kingdom of heaven on earth together, how we can do that. Okay, so that's an outline. And what I'd like you to do now is to go into a discussion. These are 2 discussion questions. Number 1, what is currently causing unhappiness in your life? So please think about, if there's any external circumstances or internal factors. What are the factors that are causing unhappiness in your life right now? Okay, it's important to be happy. We have to first understand what's making us unhappy. And number 2, what is your current understanding of God? What kind of experience have you had with God, if any? Now, some of us may or may not have any experience with God, but want you to explore that question. What's your current understanding or experience with God?